Did we talk about labor policies and the environment? Last class, did we finish this part?
Yes,
Mr.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
21
sir.
পর্যন্ত
Labor
হয়েছিল স্যার।
policy নিয়ে পড়ানো হয়েছিল।
এই পর্যন্ত হয়েছিল স্যার।
Did I talk about the argument of the supporters? Or did I only talk about the argument of the critics? Which one did I talk about?
Critics, sir. Critics.
Right. So, as I have discussed last class, guys, that the critics obviously have some very logical arguments regarding this particular factor, because as you can see, whenever any country is poor, whenever any country has weak governance, whenever they are desperate for foreign investment and export import trade, obviously this gives a lot of the foreign companies ample opportunity to exploit the weaknesses of that country, right? As I have mentioned before, they will try to take advantage of the weak environmental laws and regulations. They will try to take advantage of the weak labor laws and policies. So this is something which is very common, right? This is something which is very common in the initial phases of growth, right? As I have mentioned, the Rana Plaza incident, remember? I
Yes,
discussed Rana Plaza, right? So since then, obviously, there has been a lot of structural reforms in the garments industry to ensure a safer working environment for the labor force, to ensure that a certain minimum wage is paid to them so that they are able to afford the basic necessities of life. So a lot of reforms have taken place because of the fact that the foreign customers of many of these European and North American brands, they realized that it was time for them to step up and do something about the unfair practices which are going on in the garments industry around the world. So many customers in the developed world, they took a stand. They boycotted the products of many of these European and North American brands for a very long time. They did a lot of protests on the streets. They did a lot of community volunteering to see what is actually going wrong in some of these countries where the products are sourced from. So a lot of steps were taken, and comparatively over the past 8 to 9 years, things have improved than what it used to be, because ultimately the buyers realize যদি তারা এই রিফর্মগুলি না আনে, যদি তারা এই চেঞ্জেসগুলি না আনে, they are going to keep losing customers. So it was in their interest that they did it, right? But that is not something that always happens for all companies. Okay, so that is the argument. Sneezing is such a terrible feeling. You just start feeling weak. Did any of you get dengue this season? By any chance? Did any of you get dengue? It was
Yes, sir.
a lot of my relatives are catching dengue, so I'm sort of worried whether I got that or not, because I have terrible backache. After class today, I'll get tested probably. Anyway, so uh, on the other hand, supporterদের কথা হচ্ছে যে initial phase, obviously, if you're trying to attract foreign investment, you are going to need to have somewhat more flexibility than the developed countries. As I think I discussed this before as well, যে যদি same level difficult laws and regulations developing দেশগুলোতেও থাকে, if there is no flexibility by the government, then will the foreign companies move to the developing countries? Will they have that incentive to move to the developing countries? যদি আমেরিকায় যেরকম টাফ এনভায়রনমেন্টাল ল, ইউকেতে যেরকম টাফ এনভায়রনমেন্টাল ল, ফর এক্সাম্পল, in many of the European countries, they have environmental taxes based on the amount of pollution that you create through your production processes. You understand? So government যেটা করে যে highly polluting industry গুলির থেকে extra taxes নেয়, and they carry out various environmental sustainability measures. They take various types of measures to ensure that the impact on the environment can be minimized. For example, তাদের কথা হচ্ছে যে highly polluting industries should be paying a tax surcharge which is known as environmental tax, এবং সেই টাকা দিয়ে হয়তো তারা 10,000 গাছ লাগাবে, অথবা তারা বিভিন্ন ধরনের গ্রিন এনার্জিতে ইনভেস্ট করবে, রাইট, সেই টাকাটা। সো দে আর সেইং that the highly polluting industries should pay that extra tax so that the government can use it to compensate the effects of environmental damage through pollution, right? এই ধরনের বিভিন্ন ধরনের মেজার থাকে। Then they have very very rigid and very strong and strict labor regulations as well. No one in those countries in Europe and North America can get away with labor exploitation. If you make someone work overtime, you have to pay them overtime, right? Unpaid kono kaj keu korbe na, right? You have to give them proper benefits, you have to give them health insurance. There are lots of factors which are involved in the hiring process. The labor unions, especially in Europe and UK, are very strong as well. They have very strong bargaining power. So naturally, the companies are not really able to exploit the workforce in the development. So in many aspects, some of the companies from these countries move to the developing countries because countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, China তো এখন না obviously, but countries like Bangladesh, India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Vietnam, এইসব দেশে obviously we don't have that level of strict monitoring. You understand what I'm saying, guys? যে হয়তো laws আছে, but সব ধরনের laws হয়তো implement করা হয় না বা apply করা হয় না, or the authorities just turn a blind eye at times. Right? Do any of you remember the fire recently, Hashim Foods'er?
Yes, sir.
Many people have died from the factory fire. We take a foreign investment, local companies, but people have died. Have you read the news? None of you follow what's going on in the world, do you?
স্যার এই
August-
ইনসিডেন্টটা কি নারায়ণগঞ্জের হয়েছিল?
লোকেশনটা এক্স্যাক্টলি আমার খেয়ালে মনে হয় না নারায়ণগঞ্জ, মোস্ট লাইকলি
I think it is
নারায়ণগঞ্জ হতো। I'm not exactly sure about the location, but there was a factory fire at Hashem Foods, যারা সেজান জুস বানায়। 52 people died.
Yes, sir. That is
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
What is it?
স্যার শুনেছি।
Yes, sir.
August
Factory
মাসে
door
হয়েছে।
lock করা ছিল।
Sir, gate lock করে দিয়েছিল, sir. So the factory workers didn't get out.
Right, correct, exactly. 52 people lost their lives. So do you think that any company in the Western world, in Europe, in America, in Canada, they would be able to get away with something like this? They would still be able to continue their business?
No, sir.
Obviously no. They would get their license revoked and they would be straight away put into jail. Okay? কোনোভাবেই সেই কোম্পানি আর, because এই যে ফ্যাক্টরি ফায়ারটা হয়, whose responsibility was it? This was a totally avoidable accident. You understand what I'm saying? এই জিনিসটা কি চাইলে অ্যাভয়েড করা যেত নাকি যেত না?
Avoid করা যেত, sir. Easily avoid করা যেত, sir.
It was a complete lack of responsibility. That's it. Okay. It was a completely avoidable accident, right? And at the same time, this was something which was overlooked by the DIFE as well. Do you know what the DIFE is? The Department of Inspection for Factories and Establishments. Right? So DIFE এর কাজ হচ্ছে গিয়ে বাংলাদেশের ফ্যাক্টরিতে গিয়ে গিয়ে ইন্সপেকশন করা, মনিটর করা যে তাদের সেফটি মেজার্স গুলি ঠিকমতো নেওয়া হচ্ছে না কি হচ্ছে না। So obviously DIFEও probably missed it. Okay, বাংলাদেশে এটা খুব একটা আনকমন কোনো কিছু না। Right? মানে in general a lot of people in this country don't act in a very responsible manner. Right? You understand what I'm saying? Our Bangladesh is known for being very responsible?
No, sir.
Do we have a reputation of being very responsible in general as people?
No, sir.
Nowhere near it, right? So probably যায় ইন্সপেকশনে খেয়াল করে নাই, হয়তো দেখে নাই বা whatever, right? It missed. So this is exactly what, so coming back to the discussion of globalization, এই জিনিসটাই ফরেন কোম্পানিরা চায়, একটা lackluster regulatory environment, যেখানে মানে যারা মনিটরিং এবং ওভারসিইং এর জন্য রেসপন্সিবল থাকবে তারা খুব একটা মানে ভালো কাজ করবে না, অথবা তারা খুব বেশি মনিটরিং করবে না। Do you understand what I'm saying? যে there
Yes,
will be
sir.
a very relaxed environment, যে ইন্সপেকশনের কথা বলবে কিন্তু আসলে ইন্সপেকশন করবে না, অথবা সেটাকে ম্যানেজ করা যাবে। The inspection can be managed. Do you understand? So this is not something which is specific only to Bangladesh. This is something which is happening in most of the developing countries of the world, and this is one of the attracting factors for the foreign companies, যে weak laws and regulations. So যারা গ্লোবালাইজেশন কে সাপোর্ট করে তাদের কথা হচ্ছে যে এইরকমই থাকবে। ইনিশিয়ালি যখন একটা দেশ গরিব থাকবে তাদের রেগুলেটরি এনভায়রনমেন্টও উইক থাকবে, কারণ তারা যদি খুব স্ট্রিক্ট রেগুলেটরি এনভায়রনমেন্ট ক্রিয়েট করতে চায় তখন তারা ফরেন ইনভেস্টমেন্ট অ্যাট্রাক্ট করতে পারবে না। একটা সার্টেন পয়েন্টে গিয়ে হয়তো স্ট্রঙ্গার লজ এন্ড রেগুলেশনস ইন্ট্রোডিউস করতে পারবে একটা দেশ, যখন তারা আস্তে আস্তে সেলফ সাফিসিয়েন্ট হওয়া শুরু করবে, যখন তাদের ফরেন ফান্ডসের উপরে ডিপেন্ডেন্সি আস্তে আস্তে কমতে থাকবে, অথবা গভর্নমেন্ট একটা স্ট্রঙ্গার বার্গেনিং পজিশনে চলে যাবে, তখন গিয়ে যখন ইনকামস বাড়া শুরু করবে। ফর এক্সাম্পল চায়না, right? China now has taken much stronger steps to protect their labor force and to protect their environment. Now they don't really bend by the will of the foreign companies anymore. Now they are thinking of their own good, the good of the country, the good of the environment, and the prosperity of their labor force. Okay, এবং এই জন্য কিন্তু এখন অনেক ফরেন কোম্পানিরা আবার চায়না থেকে প্রোডাকশন অন্যান্য দেশে নিয়ে যাচ্ছে, because again they are not liking the fact that the Chinese government is become stricter than before. They are having stronger monitoring mechanisms. So এখন আবার অনেক কোম্পানি ইন্ডিয়াতে আসছে, they are going to Thailand, they are going to Vietnam, they are coming to Bangladesh, right? Because the Chinese government is becoming stricter. So this is how it goes. So globalization এর সাপোর্টাররা বলে যে এই ধরনের labor force exploitation and এই ধরনের environmental damage is going to be something very common during the initial phase of growth, but after a certain period of time, when the country eventually reaches a point where they can more or less survive on their own, or when they reach a level of development where their dependency on foreign funds and foreign companies starts to somewhat slow down, that is when the government can introduce stricter environmental and labor laws. Right? Makes sense, guys? Understood?
Yes, sir.
Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Then the third factor refers to the effects on national sovereignty. Right? We discussed organizations such as the United Nations, WTO, World Bank, IMF, etc. last class. Do any of you remember? We discussed their roles in the growth process, industrialization process, and globalization. Do you or do you not remember, guys? I discussed
Yes,
all
sir.
the organizations. What is their role then? What did I discuss last class? কি বলেছিলাম?
Negotiate.
Not just negotiate. What is their primary purpose? What does the World Bank do, for example? I clearly mentioned
The fact that they provide loans and monetary support to developing countries.
right. Correct. So এখন যারা গ্লোবালাইজেশনের এগেইনস্ট তারা বলেন, the critics of globalization say that these organizations such as the WTO, such as World Bank, European Union, United Nations, IMF, they have too much power. All right, they have too much power, and since they provide funding to many of the developing countries of the world, what they do is they have a lot of policy making power as well. You understand? এখন World Bank, I have mentioned that World Bank did not provide the loan for the Podda Bridge, right? And what was the reason they provided for not providing the loan? They said that there is too much corruption, apparently. They could not really rely on the construction process which is going to be carried out for Podda Bridge. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
So, এখন World Bank has been operating. Do you think World Bank Bangladesh আসছে just Podda Bridge বানানোর আগে?
No, sir.
No. They have been operating in Bangladesh. They have had their presence in Bangladesh for a very long time, right? আগে হঠাৎ করে আসছে, তারপরে পদ্মা ব্রিজের টাকা দেওয়ার কথা, তারপর দেখলো হঠাৎ করে অনেক করাপশন। Is it something like that?
No, sir. অনেকদিন থেকেই ছিল।
They have been operating in Bangladesh for many years. So হঠাৎ করে are then suddenly now noticing corruption. Out of nowhere হঠাৎ করে পদ্মা ব্রিজ বানানোর সময় বাংলাদেশে করাপশন চলে আসছে, আর তার আগে কোনো করাপশন ছিল না। বা what exactly do you think they're trying to do here? Why do you think ultimately তারা টাকাটা দেয়? What is the main reason?
আই থিঙ্ক করাপশন এই কারণ স্যার, যে টাকা দিয়ে পদ্মা সেতু করছে ওই টাকা দিয়ে তো আরো অনেক কম টাকা লাগতো।
না না, এখন ঘটনা হচ্ছে আমি ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংকের পার্সপেক্টিভ থেকে বলার চেষ্টা করছি যে মানে তারা তো নতুন বাংলাদেশে আসে নাই, তারা তো নতুন নাইজেরিয়াতে যায় নাই, তারা তো নতুন সুদানে যায় নাই, তারা তো নতুন নেপালে যায় নাই, রাইট? দে হ্যাভ বিন অপারেটিং ইন দিস কান্ট্রিজ ফর আ লং টাইম। এবং অন্যান্য প্রজেক্টে তো ঠিকই টাকা দিয়ে যাচ্ছে। ইট ইজ মানে ইজ ইট a big secret that most of the developing countries have corruption? Is this a sudden factor?
No, sir.
Is this a new factor?
নো স্যার।
No, sir.
Obviously not, right? But এখানে যে ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে যে the government is getting tired of all the policy decisions which are being provided by these organizations. কারণ তারা যখন টাকা দেয়, তারা যখন গ্র্যান্ট দেয়, তখন সেইগুলির সাথে বিভিন্ন ধরনের পলিসি কন্ডিশনস অ্যাটাচ থাকে, and in all aspects they don't really help the country which the government understands. Okay, তারা যেই ধরনের পলিসি প্রোভাইড করে সেটা কোনো কোনো সময় কাজে লাগে, আবার কোনো কোনো সময় খুব বাজেভাবে ব্যাকফায়ার করে, রাইট? সো ইট ইজ, সো আর দে সাপোজড টু রান দ্য কান্ট্রি অফ বাংলাদেশ, or are they always supposed to dictate the internal policies of the country?
No, sir.
No, they are not elected government officials. They might provide suggestions যে XYZ এই জিনিসগুলি করলে you will be experiencing better growth. But if you see there is a big difference between suggestions and conditions. Are they the same thing?
No, sir.
How are they different? What is the difference between providing someone a suggestion and providing a condition?
Sir, condition is like something that has to be abide by করতে হবে, and suggestion
Right, that is
Sir, suggestion কোনো
mandated.
compulsion নেই।
We don't necessarily have to follow the suggestion.
Condition
condition
is
হলে
compulsory.
It is
জি।
compulsory, right? Correct. So obviously যে ধরনের policies conditions তারা দিয়েছিল সেটা গভর্নমেন্টের পছন্দ হয় নাই for very obvious reasons, right? It সব সময় ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক বা এডিবি বা আইএমএফ এদের সাজেশন কাজে লাগে না। At certain times it backfires very badly, and the government now has the capability গত 10-15 বছরে যেইভাবে আমাদের দেশ ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়ালাইজ হয়েছে because of the government initiatives, So obviously we don't always need to listen to what the World Bank says. Okay, we can formulate our own policies, right? So সেই ব্যাপারগুলিতে তাদের সাথে এগ্রিমেন্ট হয় নাই, অনেক কিছু ইন্টারনাল কনফ্লিক্ট ছিল, so naturally they did not provide the money. But did that stop us from constructing the bridge?
No, sir.
No, we have sufficient tax revenues. This is a matter of pride actually, the way our remittances are coming in, the way our country is industrialized, that significantly our dependence on these sort of organizations have declined, right? Whereas in many of the African countries, they are still completely dependent on these organizations. They have absolutely no capability of their own to even survive. Forget constructing bridges and improving infrastructure, সেইগুলি তো impossible. তাদের বেসিক সার্ভাইভালই এখনো এইসব অর্গানাইজেশনের উপর ডিপেন্ডেন্ট, and these organizations at times obviously manipulate the governments of these countries. Okay, and so the critics have a valid point. Unelected organizations, unelected bureaucrats or diplomats from these organizations often try to implement policies in the developing countries which does not always help them. At times it does, yes. এখন 50 বছর আগে যে ধরনের পলিসি সাজেশনগুলি ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক দিয়েছিল বা আইএমএফ দিয়েছিল, of course those helped us. For example, to increase direct investment, we opened our economies, right? Foreign direct investment বাড়ানোর জন্য of course the government had taken steps and that has helped, but সব ধরনের পলিসি সবসময় কাজে লাগে না. For example, ADB একটা পলিসি দিয়েছিল, এশিয়ান ডেভেলপমেন্ট ব্যাংক, যেখানে তারা একটা ফরেস্ট ক্লিয়ার করে ময়মনসিংহ, তারপর নেত্রকোনা, ওই রিজিয়নটাতে, as far as I remember, they suggested to clear out the forest, Asian Development Bank, and do intensive farming. Okay, তাদের কথা ছিল যে পুরো জঙ্গলটা ক্লিয়ার করে, ফরেস্টটাকে ক্লিয়ার করে সেখানে ফার্মিং করে একটা সাইডে অল্প একটা ফরেস্ট রাখার কথা, or something like that. I don't exactly remember what the years, because I read this article like a year ago. So আমার একদম exact জিনিসটা মনে, but what the gist of it is, or the summary of this was যে এডিবির এই সাজেশনটার ফরেস্ট্রি ডিপার্টমেন্ট নেয়, বাংলাদেশের ডিপার্টমেন্ট অফ ফরেস্ট্রি, they cleared out the forest and it heavily negatively impacted the local ecosystem. Alright, তারা যে সাজেশনটা দেয় সেটা একদমই ওয়ার্কআউট করে নাই, এডিবির সাজেশনটা। তারা সেখানে যে ফরেস্ট ক্লিয়ার আউট করতে বলে, that was a terrible suggestion. It heavily damaged the local environment and the local ecosystem, and they can't recover the forest anymore. সেখানে ফার্মিংও করতে পারে নাই, because apparently the land wasn't fertile enough for regular farming, and they instead cleared out the forest, and now it completely damaged the ecosystem of that region. Okay, so এরা অনেক সময় কোনো কিছু না বুঝে বুঝে এক দেশের, দেখা গেল এই পলিসিটা হয়তো লেটস সে ইন্দোনেশিয়াতে কাজ করেছিল বা ফিলিপিন্সে কাজ করেছিল, in some other country this method worked. So without even analyzing the situation in Bangladesh, they just suggested this to the Department of Forest, and পরে যখন জিনিসটা ব্যাকফায়ার করে তখন ADB completely denied it. They said যে আমরা যেভাবে বলেছিলাম সেইভাবে ফরেস্ট্রি ডিপার্টমেন্ট করে নাই, তারা অন্যভাবে করেছিল, এই জন্য কাজ করেনি. They completely denied all responsibility. Okay, so this is something where the critics have a very strong point, যে এই ধরনের অর্গানাইজেশনগুলি, although their overall intention is to help, but they often suggest policies without considering the implications in the local economy. Okay, you understand? On the other hand, supporterদের কথা হচ্ছে, এই পার্সপেক্টিভে সাপোর্টাররা যেটা বলতে চায় সেটা হচ্ছে যে the power of these organizations depend on the degree to which the individual governments grant them. Okay, তাদের কথা হচ্ছে যে আসলে কতটুকু ইনফ্লুয়েন্সিয়াল হবে UN organizations such as UNDP, UNICEF, WHO, তারপরে WFP, and other organizations such as World Bank, IMF, to what degree they are going to be effective or to what degree they are going to manipulate the government will depend on the strength of the individual governments. যদি একটা দেশের গভর্নমেন্ট এমন একটা লেভেল রিচ করে যে তাদের এইসব অর্গানাইজেশনের হেল্প আর দরকার নাই, তখন অবভিয়াসলি তারা কিন্তু কোনো ধরনের পলিসি মেকিং এ ইনফ্লুয়েন্স করতে পারবে না। ফর এক্সাম্পল, ইন কান্ট্রিজ লাইক থাইল্যান্ড, মালয়েশিয়া, দ্য ইউএন অর্গানাইজেশনস আর ভেরি স্মল। তাদের এখন আর কোনো কাজই নেই বলতে গেলে, মালয়েশিয়াতে, থাইল্যান্ডে, সাউথ কোরিয়াতে, in all these Hong Kong and Singapore, these countries have become so developed that they don't really need the help or the suggestions or the guidelines of these organizations anymore. They have become very small. My father used to work for a UN organization, so I know this personally, right? Because as the countries grow, as the countries become more developed, their dependency on these organizations decline. For example, UNICEF UNICEF primarily works in the healthcare of children and the education of children. এটা হচ্ছে তাদের দুইটা মেইন কাজের মধ্যে একটা। মানে these are their two main pathways of work, right? So in countries like Thailand, Malaysia, the healthcare system has rapidly improved and the education sector has also rapidly improved. The government has ensured education, a minimum level of education for the majority of the population, or the children in this case. Also, healthcare has improved immensely as well. So, obviously, UNICEF এখন আর তেমন কোনো কাজ নেই. Same has happened with Malaysia as well. So, এদের এখন এইসব দেশে তেমন কাজ নেই. So, obviously, তারা government policy আর influence করতে পারে না. You understand? On the other hand, in Africa, they are completely determining all types of policies because they know that the people in those countries will not be able to survive without the loans and the grants that they provide. So supported the logic হচ্ছে যে if you can grow, if you can survive on your own, obviously তখন আর এইসব organization তোমার internal policy কে আর influence করতে পারবে। That is the logic of the supporters, right? Clear so far, everyone? Understood? Makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. And lastly, how is globalization affecting the poorest groups of people in the world? Right? So, globalization and anti-globalization যারা তাদের কথা হচ্ছে যে globalization যদি এত ভালো একটা জিনিস হয়, if globalization is such a good thing, then why is the gap between the rich nations and the poor nations getting wider? And at the same time, why is the gap between the rich and poor in specific countries also getting wider? Do any of you know that Bangladesh has one of the highest rates of inequality in the world?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. What do you understand by the term inequality?
Sir, rich are getting richer and poor are getting poorer.
Right. So, মানে বাংলাদেশের ব্যাপারটা হচ্ছে এরকম না যে the poorer are getting poorer. Slight correction এখানে. The thing is, the thing is that the pace at which the richer people are experiencing growth in their incomes, the poorer people are not experiencing the same level of growth. Okay, that is why the massive disparity is created. You understand? এখন obviously যারা ইনভেস্টর বা এন্টারপ্রেনিউর, তাদের যে রেটে ইনকাম গ্রোথ হবে যে কোনো একটা ইকোনমিক বুমের সময়, বা if they decide to rapidly expand their business, will that same level of growth be experienced by the labor classes?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Definitely the labor class is not going to experience the same rate of growth. In fact, the labor class will not experience any growth if they don't really fight for their rights. এই যে minimum wage set করা হয়েছে গার্মেন্টস ওয়ার্কারদের, এটা কি করা হতো if they didn't go out on the streets and get vocal about the discriminations that they're facing and the inequality that exists in the economy, যদি তারা এই জিনিসটার জন্য ফাইট না করতো, তাদের মিনিমাম ওয়েজ কি এস্টাবলিশ করা হতো?
নো স্যার।
No, sir.
Obviously not. So that is the thing. This is not something again which is Bangladesh specific, right? Do any of you know about the 80-20 rule? What the 80-20 rule means? Have any of you heard of the term the 80-20 rule? So what it refers to is the fact that 20% of the population of the world controls 80% of the assets and resources on a global level and on a national level as well. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
So obviously inequality বাড়বে এবং এটা কিছু করার নাই. This is how the capitalist world works. There will be certain groups of people who are going to be incredibly wealthy, and the rest of the people will have a moderate lifestyle, and the other percentage of the people will only be able to afford the basic needs. Do you understand what capitalism is? I'm going to discuss capitalism in chapter 2. Okay. Capitalism. Have any of you heard this term before? Those of you who have done Eco 101.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So what do you understand by it? How does the capitalist system work?
So there's private ownership.
Sorry?
There's private ownership.
Yes. Private ownership. Correct. So anyway, I'm going to discuss this further in chapter 2. So the thing is, যারা গ্লোবালাইজেশনের এগেইনস্টে তাদের কথা হচ্ছে যে যদি গ্লোবালাইজেশন এত একটা ভালো জিনিসই হয়, তাহলে পৃথিবীর গরিব দেশগুলি এখনো গরিব কেন থেকে যাচ্ছে, এবং why are the richer countries getting richer and why are the poorest segments of the people in the different countries remaining poor while the rich get richer. So this is something which can't really be helped, all right, because the thing is, obviously the investors and the entrepreneurs are going to have the majority share of the incomes. এখন যে একটা বিজনেস করতে নামবে, সে কি সব প্রফিট স্যালারি ওয়েজে দিয়ে দিবে তার ওয়ার্কারদেরকে?
No, sir.
Is anyone going to do that? Obviously not. So capitalism isn't a perfect system, okay, but if you have the will and the talent, you can obviously go up the ranks. Or if you think that you have the ability to do so, or if you are brave enough to start your own business, do it. Right? Otherwise, supporters don't complain about this. Okay? That's how it is. That's how the whole world works. And obviously, but যারা সাপোর্টার তারা এইটাও বলে যে over the past 50 to 60 years, the gap is starting to minimize between the rich countries and the poorer countries as well, because many Asian countries are doing very well. Okay, many Asian countries such as Thailand, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, these countries through rapid industrialization and nowadays even Bangladesh is an emerging economy. India is also trying to industrialize itself very fast. So obviously it's not like পৃথিবীর সব গরিব দেশই গরিবই থেকে যাচ্ছে. Over the past 50 to 60 years, many countries have become rapidly industrialized. South Korea is an example as well. Japan was relatively more developed always, but South Korea কিন্তু এমন না যে সব সময় অনেক রিচ ছিল, but they have taken steps, they have taken policies which has attracted a huge amount of foreign investment and which has allowed them to grow very fast. And South Korea, can any of you guess the GDP per capita of South Korea? It's a very rich country. Singapore is a very rich country, right? But they were not always very rich. Okay, it's not like মানে 100 বছর আগেও এরকম রিচ ছিল সিঙ্গাপুর বা সাউথ কোরিয়া. সিঙ্গাপুরে এখন per capita GDP $35,000, which is very high, which is for an Asian country which was not always industrialized, this is a very high GDP per capita, right? সিঙ্গাপুরের জিডিপি পার ক্যাপিটা তো ওয়ার্ল্ডের মধ্যে ওয়ান অফ দ্য হাইয়েস্ট। সো যারা সাপোর্টার তারা বলে যে এমন না যে শুধু ইউরোপিয়ান দেশটাই সবসময় রিচ থাকবে বা নর্থ আমেরিকান দেশটাই সবসময় রিচ থাকবে, যেই সব দেশ প্রপার পলিসিস নিতে পেরেছে, যেই সব দেশ ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়ালাইজ করতে পেরেছে, যারা ফরেন ডিরেক্ট ইনভেস্টমেন্ট আনতে পেরেছে, দে হ্যাভ অল গ্রোন। Okay, I have personally seen in my visits to Thailand and Malaysia over the past 15 to 20 years, every time I have been to any of these countries, every 2-3 years, I have, because my father worked in those countries and just to visit as well, I have visited both Thailand and Malaysia. And প্রত্যেক 2-3 বছর পর গেলে you can see the clear growth and development. এই দুইটা দেশ, they have done phenomenally well, right? So গ্লোবালাইজেশনের এগেইনস্টে যারা, তাদের আর্গুমেন্টটা এই ফ্যাক্টরটাতে খুবই উইক, because many countries, because of globalization has grown, because of the fact that production has moved from the advanced countries to the Asian countries, they use this opportunity to improve their economy, right? So যারা সাপোর্টার তাদের কথা হচ্ছে যেসব দেশ গ্রো করে না, ইটস নট বিকজ অফ গ্লোবালাইজেশনের সাথে সেটার কোনো সম্পর্ক নাই। যেসব দেশ গ্রো করে না, ফর এক্সাম্পল মেনি কান্ট্রিজ ইন আফ্রিকা ডোন্ট গ্রো অর ডেভেলপ অর ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়ালাইজ, ইটস বিকজ they have massive corruption. Many of those countries have civil wars, they have economic mismanagement, they have poor monetary and fiscal policy, many of them have large debt burdens, right? We talked about the loans that countries take from organizations such as IMF and World Bank, right? এখন বাংলাদেশে thankfully we have been able to use the loans and grants we got from these organizations, and as a result, our infrastructure has developed. The government has taken very significant steps to ensure that we continuously keep industrializing. But African দেশগুলিতে সেটা হয়। Unfortunately, African দেশগুলিতে তারা লোন নেয় ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক থেকে, তারা লোন নেয় IMF থেকে, তারপরে সেগুলি সব মিনিস্টাররা পলিটিশিয়ানদের পকেটে চলে যায়। You understand what I'm saying? So if you are able to utilize the opportunities and resources that are provided to you, obviously you will be able to grow. That is what the supporters say. যেসব দেশ অপরচুনিটি গুলি নিয়েছে, যেসব দেশ ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংকের গ্র্যান্ট, IMF এর গ্র্যান্ট, UN policies কে properly utilize করেছে, of course those countries have been able to improve their economy. All right, so this has nothing to do with globalization. It has to do with corruption, civil war, lack of education, lack of healthcare, poor policy decisions, large debt burdens. যেরকম countries like Haiti, Iraq, Libya, Nigeria, Sudan, North Korea, Zimbabwe, they're all highly indebted poor countries or HIPCs, মানে বিলিয়ন ডলার লোন নেয় IMF থেকে, ওয়ার্ল্ড ব্যাংক থেকে, তারপর সেই লোনগুলো ইউজ করে না, তারপরে আবার লোন নেয়, তারপরে আবার লোন নেয়, and the cycle continues. So they have high levels of debt and they are never able to get out of the cycle. You understand what I'm saying? So that is the difference in opinion between the critics and the supporters, right? Clear, everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any questions from chapter 1, guys? Do any of you have any questions from chapter 1?
Sir,
Mutasima? Yes.
sir, I have a question. It's a little out of the topic. May I ask?
Let me take the attendance first. Yeah.
Okay, sir.
Mutasim Rahman. Mutasim Rahman. Momtaz Rahman.
Present, sir.
Amim Nasmus.
Present, sir.
Shihabul Islam.
Present, sir.
Monirul Islam.
Present, sir.
Sumaya Haq.
Present, sir.
Mushfika Chaudhary.
Present, sir.
Siam Akrar.
Present, sir.
Ayman Mohammad.
স্যার ওর নেট চলে গেছে স্যার ও আমাকে মেসেজ দিছিল
Hello, sir. Sir, did you call my name? I'm facing a real bad connection because I'm not having electricity right now.
And you are?
I'm using
Sir, I am
data right
Mohammed,
now,
sir.
sir. Ayman
Who
Mohammed
are
Shalom.
you? You need to tell me your name.
Ayman Mohammed Shalom.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I called your name. Sheikh Arkam.
Present, sir.
Zaidul Hassan.
Present, sir.
Jihadul Islam. Jihadul Islam. Ardina Noor.
Present, sir.
Jannatul Firdaus.
Present, sir.
I think I have a Jannatul Firdaus in all 4 sections. All of them. Uh, Hassan Al Mamun. Hassan Al Mamun. Arrafi Siddiq.
Sir, Hassan al Mamun present, sir.
Arrafi Siddiq.
Yes, sir.
Hasrat Mehzabin.
Present, sir.
Hasrat Mehzabin. Samin Arab.
Yes, sir.
Omtar Sharid.
Present, sir.
Akib Hassan.
Present, sir.
Muntazim Sadiq.
Yes, sir.
Zuhair Ishrat.
Present, sir.
Ali Abrar. Ali Abrar. Rashna Yasmin.
Present, sir.
Al Nahyan.
Present, sir.
Rezwanur Rahman.
Present,
Rezwanur
sir.
Rahman.
Present, sir.
Don't make me call your name 3-4 times today, alright? I'm already having trouble speaking. Samin Mohammad.
Present, sir.
Kanis Faria.
Present, sir.
Hasin Anwar.
Present, sir.
Maisha Mubashara.
Present, sir.
Prothama Prachi.
Present, sir.
Merin Tanzim.
Present, sir.
Sajidul Islam.
Present, sir.
Mohsin Afroz.
Present, sir.
Harshur Mahin.
Present, sir.
Mehzabin Haq. Mehzabin Haq.
Present, sir.
Aktahila Biba.
Present, sir.
Asifin Nabi.
Yes, sir.
Onik Ramjun.
Present, sir.
Digant Purwa.
Present, sir.
Ali Shairani.
Present, sir.
Asif Kabir.
Present, sir.
Ishtiaq Idris.
Present, sir.
Zaid Samir. Zain Samir, Tisha Twinkle,
Present, sir.
and,
Sir,
yes.
sir, I have an internet issue, sir. Hassan Al Mamun, did you present?
Okay.
Hassan Al Mamun.
Hassan Al Mamun. Wait.
Thank you, sir.
Ali Abrar নাই, Munzarin Samir নাই. Ali Abrar and Munzarin Samir is not here. Oof. I hate this time of season change. Every year I get sick. Yeah. Yes, sir. একটা সময় at least ঢাকায় the winter used to be fun. Now the winter is miserable as well with the dust and everything. So one of you had a question, yeah? When I was taking attendance?
Yes, sir. So, sir, we have talked about many developing countries or poor countries running into debt because of not being able to pay back the loans that they borrow from IMF, WTO, and the World Bank. So, even after knowing that they won't be able to pay back the loans, কেন স্যার তাদের তাও লোন দেওয়া হয়?
Because of charity. It's like, why do you think we still keep the Rohingyas, for example? Right? It's just a humane cause, basically. You want people to somehow survive, right? Are the Rohingyas at all have any sort of positive effect on our country?
No,
Do
sir.
they have any positive effect
No,
on
sir.
the economy, on
Sir.
our environment, on any, কোনো দিক দিয়ে এদের থেকে আমরা কোনো benefit পাই?
No, sir.
Why do we
Sir,
still
Rohingyas make our government look good in the face of other countries.
that can't be the only reason, right? It's a human cause, right? Where will these people go if we throw them out? Just like that. How will some of the African countries survive if they don't provide loans? পরে কি অনেক সময় সেই লোনগুলিকে ইয়ে করে দেওয়া হয়? They are basically কি জানি, there is a term for it. Debt relief. It's called debt relief. So অনেক সময় দেখা যায় যে out of charity or out of compassion, many of these global organizations don't take the loans back. That is how they work. আবার অনেক সময় নেয়, অনেক সময় নেয় না। Look, Africa in many aspects is completely dysfunctional. Okay? So ওদের সাথে আসলে কোনো কিছুর compare করে লাভ নেই. If you ever visit Africa, any country, I went to Sudan, right? When my father used to work there. And আমরা আমাদের দেশ নিয়ে অনেক কিছু অনেক টাইমে কমপ্লেন করি, এটা ঠিক নেই, ওটা ঠিক নেই, রাস্তায় ট্রাফিক, এই সেই। Your entire perspective about our country is going to change if you ever visit a completely broken and dysfunctional country in Africa. You're going to think, when I came back to Dhaka, it felt like Dhaka is America. Legit, I'm not even kidding. Right? That is a whole another level of poverty and dysfunction and completely broken একটা system যেটা আমরা ইমাজিনও করতে পারবো না। It's so bad. It's just unbelievably bad, unbelievable poverty. মানে এখন অ্যাটলিস্ট বাংলাদেশে আমরা কি এটা শুনি যে কোনো মানুষ না খেয়ে মারা যাচ্ছে বাংলাদেশে?
নো স্যার, খুবই কম।
মানে this is something which we don't hear at all, right? The people are dying from a lack of food. That is not something that happens in our country anymore, not for a long time actually. But in some of those African countries, people are still dying of starvation, just there is no food, right? So when I came back from Sudan, I had a newfound appreciation for Bangladesh. I genuinely started to recognize the changes, the growth that we are experiencing. Of course, there are problems. এখন এরকম একটা ইনসেইন লেভেলে পপুলেশন নিয়ে তো কখনোই কোনো দেশ মানে ইউরোপ আমেরিকার মতো, নর্থ আমেরিকা বা ইউরোপের মতো ডেভেলপ করতে পারবে না, because the population pressure is crazy in this country, right? If we had like 6-7 crore people, we would be the probably one of the most developed countries in the world, with the entrepreneurial attitude and the hard-working mentality that people in this country have. But এরকম 20 কোটি মানুষ নিয়ে তো আসলে কিছু করা যায় না। Like ultimately কি হয় যে চ্যাপ্টার 2 তে আমি এটা ডিসকাস করব, but sorry, chapter 3 তে how the GDP and GNI works. So and if you have such an abnormally large population, intense population density, যতই grow করুক doesn't help. So this is one of the core problems that we have. China, India তে আমাদের থেকে density কম. China and India, two of the biggest, most populated countries of the world, has a lower per square mile density than Bangladesh. Can you imagine? এবং তারপরেও আক্কেল জ্ঞান নাই এই দেশের মানুষের। মানে আমার বাসায় যে পার্ট টাইম বুয়া কাজ করে, she has 5 children. Can you imagine? 5. মানে at times I ask her, what was wrong with you and your husband? What went wrong? But I'm not really sure. 5 or 6. So these are the people who are destroying the country. So yeah. Anyway, chapter 2 is about the political economy of a country, right? Political economy মানে কি national differences in political economy. Every country has 3 systems, right? The political system, economic system, and legal system, and they work with each other. They are all interdependent and all connected with each other. Okay, especially the political and economic system has to work in tandem, has to work with each other. If you have a certain type of political system, then the representing economic system will also have to be similar. Or traditionally আমরা সেইটাই ভাবতাম। এখন obviously we are seeing many different forms of political system and many different forms of economic systems as well. But essentially historically দেখা যেত যে political system এবং economic systems are totally interdependent on each other. They have to work with each other. They are dependent on each other, right? And the legal system after that as well, right? So overall, এই যে তিনটা সিস্টেমের বেসিসে countries work or countries are run on the basis of these 3 systems, this is known as the political economy of any country, right? এই তিনটা সিস্টেমের কম্বিনেশনটাকে বলা হয় political economy, right? So political systeমের আগে হচ্ছে গিয়ে political ideology. Before the political system comes the political ideology. যে একটা সিস্টেম কিভাবে আসবে, একটা আইডিয়া থেকেই তো আসবে, right? Obviously you can't create a system without an idea. So the political system of socialism is the result of the political ideology of collectivism. So collectivism কি বলতে চায় যে instead of thinking about only your personal goals, your personal ambitions, your personal income, your personal growth, your personal assets, think of the overall society where you are a member of. Right? That is what collectivism says. So don't only think of yourself, also think of the greater society. How you as an individual can have a positive effect on the overall society where you are a member. Do you understand what I'm saying? Does this make sense?
Yes, sir.
নর্মালি মানুষ কি হয়, স্পেশালি বাংলাদেশিরা আসলে কোন কোন দিক দিয়ে খুবই কালেক্টিভিস্টিক, আবার কোন কোন দিক থেকে খুবই ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালিস্টিক। অলরাইট, সো অন্যরা কি করে না করে এইসব ব্যাপারে খুব কালেক্টিভিস্টিক, যে মানে আরেকজন মানুষের লাইফের ব্যাপারে ইনপুট দেওয়ার জন্য বাঙালি অলওয়েজ ভেরি গুড অ্যাট ইট। বাট ইফ ইউ যদি কোনো ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল হেল্প কেউ চায় বা কোনো ট্যানজিবল কোনো কিছুর কোনো হেল্প চায়, তখন আবার খুবই ইন্ডিভিজুয়ালিস্টিক। 500 টাকা দিতেও মানুষের গায়ে লাগবে। ইউ আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ড হোয়াট আই এম সেইং? এর মধ্যে আমার এক রিলেটিভকে দেখলাম যে ইজ মানে মানে massively wealthy, all right, massively wealthy, so but extremely, very very tight about money. So আমার সামনেই দেখলাম যে তার ড্রাইভার এসে বলল যে স্যার এরকম আমার ছেলে খুবই অসুস্থ, আমার একটু সাহায্য দরকার। তার বলে কত টাকা দরকার? বলছে যে 2000 টাকা দরকার। দ্য ড্রাইভার said যে তার 2000 টাকা দরকার, কিন্তু সে তার ড্রাইভারকে 2000 টাকা না দিয়ে 1000 টাকা দিল। রাইট? সো এইসব দিক দিয়ে মানে when it comes to money, the people in this country can be extremely individualistic, but when being unnecessarily intrusive about other people's lives, তখন আবার খুবই collectivistic. Right? So how many of you have gotten compared to your cousins about school grades growing up? যে তোমার এই চাচাতো ভাই তো অলওয়েজ ফার্স্ট হয়, তোমার এই মামাতো বোন তো অলওয়েজ ফার্স্ট হয়, তুমি কেন হচ্ছ না, এই সেই this comparison. Did you get this growing up? Any of you?
Yes, sir. Many times.
Sir, I got this with my sibling.
Sorry,
I got this with my sibling.
You got what?
I was compared with my sibling.
ও আচ্ছা, ওই তো হ্যাঁ, মানে ভাই বোনের সাথে তো তাও কম। আমার এটা ছিল না, since I am an only child, I had no brothers or sisters to get compared with, but I always used to get compared with my cousins. Okay? আমি আবার ভালো করলে আমার কাজিনরা তখন সেই সময় আমার সাথে কম্পেয়ার হতো, মানে we used to talk about this, right? Let's say আমি এক বছর ফার্স্ট ছিলাম, তখন ও আমার সাথে কম্পেয়ার হলো, দেখা গেল আমি তারপর বছর সেকেন্ড হলাম, তখন আবার ও আমার সাথে কম্পেয়ার, রাইট? And we used to laugh about this, যে what is this ridiculous comparison? So মানে this is what we mean by, মানে কোনো কোনো ক্ষেত্রে এটাও একটা collectivistic attitude, যে we are so tied with our families in our country, যে especially with cousins. I don't know about you guys, but I'm very close to my cousins. So especially since I grew up as an only child, our cousins সাথে I have a very close bond. In general, my family has a very close bond as well. So that's how it used to be. This comparison. This is also part of collectivism as well. Okay, so all of these things considered, the ideology is known as collectivism. যে একটা সোসাইটির মানুষরা শুধু তার নিজের ইনকাম, নিজের প্রপার্টি, নিজের অ্যাসেট, নিজের ক্যারিয়ার, এই ধরনের চিন্তা ভাবনা সে শুধু করবে না, সে পুরো সোসাইটির ব্যাপারে সে চিন্তা করবে, how he or she can be useful for the society, right? How he or she as a member of the society can contribute towards the betterment of the society. That is what we mean by collectivistic thinking, right? You as the individual is less important than the overall improvement or betterment of the collective society. And the Greek philosopher Plato came up with this type of ideology. And eventually, Karl Marx, the very famous German social scientist, he refined. Have any of you heard of Karl Marx?
Yes,
Before?
sir.
Yes, sir. German
So
philosopher.
Karl Marx এই আইডিওলজিটাকে আরো ফার্দার রিফাইন করে এবং সে he basically came up with the political system. আইডিওলজিটাকে সে কনভার্ট করে সোশ্যালিজমে নিয়ে যায়. He came up with the idea of socialism, right? Because when there were kings and queens and the royal families, the monarchs in power, how do you think the asset distribution took place? Who owned the majority of the properties and assets? Was it the common farming workers or labor class, or was it the royal families?
The royal family.
Definitely the royal families back in those days, 300, 400, 500 years back, it was the majority of the land, the majority of the capital, the majority of the assets, resources, natural resources, everything was under the control of the royal families, their members, their ministers, the elite classes, right? So এই যে 80-20 এর ব্যাপারটা আমি একটু আগে বললাম যে 20% of the people controls 80% of the resources. This has been something which has existed for hundreds of years, right? এবং এই জিনিসটাই কার্ল মার্কস এবং কমিউনিস্টরা চেঞ্জ করার চেষ্টা করেছিল যে this is a very unfair system that only a few people are going to own everything and the rest of the people are going to be poor, the rest of the people are going to be working class, the rest of the people are not going to be compensated properly for their efforts and their labor. এই জিনিসটাকে কার্ল মার্কস চেষ্টা করেছিল চেঞ্জ করতে, right? And that is why he came up with the political system of socialism. Do you guys understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh man. So Karl Marx's argument is that few people benefit at the expense of the majority in a capitalist society where individual freedoms are not restricted. Okay. Successful capitalists, মানে হচ্ছে royal family রা অথবা investor রা অথবা entrepreneur রা, they will gather massive wealth, all right? But the working class people, তারা একটা subsistence level-এ বেঁচে থাকবে. What do you mean by subsistence? Have any of you heard the word subsistence before? What leads to inequality? Inequality কথাটা একটু আগে বলছিলাম যে inequality কেন হয়? What leads to inequality? How is inequality created?
Sir, the gap.
The gap,
The
right?
difference
So,
of power.
sorry?
The difference of power.
The difference of both power and wealth.
Yeah.
Right? So, Karl Marxের কথা হচ্ছে যে ক্যাপিটালিস্ট সোসাইটিতে শুধু একটা narrow group of people, a very few number of people are going to have all the wealth, all the assets, all the income, and the rest of the people, the working class people, are going to live in subsistence. মানে হচ্ছে there will be paid a very low wage where they can barely afford the basic needs of food, clothing and shelter. এত কম টাকা স্যালারি ওয়েজ দেওয়া হচ্ছিল এবং এখনো হয় ইনফ্যাক্ট যে ক্যাপিটালিস্ট সোসাইটি কখনো একটা ফেয়ার এবং ইকুয়াল সোসাইটি ক্রিয়েট করতে পারে না, রাইট? সো কার্ল মার্ক্সের কথা হচ্ছে যে ইনভেস্টররা বা এন্টারপ্রেনিয়ররা বা বিজনেস ওনার্সরা যেই ইনকামটা এনজয় করে সেটা ক্রিয়েট করে কারা? ফর এক্সাম্পল, ইনভেস্টার্স অর entrepreneurs sell products and services, right? They make money by selling products and services. But do the owners or the board of directors or the CEO, CFO, CMO, chief of human resource, এরা কি actually factory-তে গিয়ে সেই প্রোডাক্টটা বানাচ্ছে?
No,
Are they
sir.
the ones who are
No,
making
sir.
the product or the service themselves? কারা বানায়? Who is actually making the product?
Worker.
The worker labor.
And the labor force is actually making the product. So তার কথা হচ্ছে যে যাদের কন্ট্রিবিউশনে, যাদের কাজের জন্য প্রোডাক্ট বা সার্ভিস বানানো হচ্ছে, তারাই সবচেয়ে কম টাকা পাচ্ছে। The ones who are creating the product for you, যেটা থেকে মালিকরা, সিইওরা, সিএফওরা ম্যাসিভ স্যালারি নিচ্ছে, যেটা থেকে বোর্ড অফ ডিরেক্টরসরা ম্যাসিভ প্রফিট নিচ্ছে, যেটা থেকে ওনাররা ম্যাসিভ প্রফিট নিচ্ছে, তারা কিন্তু নিজেরা গিয়ে প্রোডাক্টটা বানাচ্ছে। It's the working class labor force who is making the product, and they are the ones who are getting the lowest share of the pie. They are the ones who are getting the lowest wages. So he was very vocally against this concept, and that is why he came up with the theory of, or the political system of socialism, that the pay of the workers, the wages of the workers must reflect the full value of their efforts and their labor. Okay, that is the primary concept of socialism. You understand what I'm saying, guys? Is this clear? Does this make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So, let's finish here for today, and inshallah next week we are going to continue the discussion, and we are going to discuss how eventually socialism was split up into two parts: communism and social democracy. Right? These are the two branches of socialism. Anything else? Anyone? Do any of you have any questions? Clear so far?
Yes, sir.
All right. Then we are done for today. All right. See you next week.
Assalamualaikum.
Stay safe, sir. Allah Hafiz.
Assalamualaikum.